Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a very exciting session. We're going to dive into a challenge that most P&C insurers are facing: how to modernize print and mail without compromising compliance or customer experience. You'll hear some real-world insights from our speakers, and we'll leave time at the end for your questions. So if anything comes to mind as we go, just drop your questions in the Q&A panel and we'll track them throughout the session. Now, to kick things off, I'll hand over to our presenters, Jeff Weldon from Madison Advisors and Bill Crowley from CSG. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. I hope you find this a very informative session. Bill and I are going to try to give you the information that you need in a very concise 30-minute period here. Just some background. My name is Jeff Weldon. I've been an analyst in the customer communication space for a really long time, 25 years or so. Madison Advisors is an analyst group. We're focused in customer communications management, anything from document creation until putting it into the mail stream through print factories and vendors such as CSG. Just some background on this. We did some work with CSG recently. There's a white paper that there'll be a link to at the end of this program talking about the capabilities that CSG brings to the insurance marketplace. CSG is a very strong provider in the print and mail space, also with online services and the like. So the white paper kind of goes into all that, so I won't spend a lot of time there. Just to give some background for the market and as we see it, we see some big changes going on in the P&C marketplace in particular. Everybody's figured out that as much as they would like print to go away, it's not going to. Either it's state regulated or individual business groups require it within a company. Then there's ID cards and the like. There's a variety of stuff that currently is printed and is going to be printed for the foreseeable future. One of the problems that we see is that the resources that are available for in-house print operations are getting a little long in the tooth. And one of the problems is as volumes have gone down, it becomes increasingly difficult for companies to justify making improvements in terms of new printing equipment, new insertion equipment, and making changes that are necessary in terms of capabilities within the software environment. So the tracking ability that a provider such as CSG has, where they can track a document from file receipt all the way through putting it into the mail stream, those capabilities are frequently not available in an internal operation. And that's why we see an increasing number of companies start to outsource their environments rather than make the investments into new equipment internally. Our other recent research shows that in around 2020 was probably the lowest price that people are going to see for print and mail. The pandemic drove up the cost for everything, paper, envelopes, staffing, postage. And so as we saw a dip in prices and with commoditization, that has now changed. And basically companies can expect increasing prices going forward. The fastest of those growing, obviously, are postage costs, where we sort of have to take what the Postal Commission gives us. So that's sort of our quick overview of Madison's view of the print and mail space with regards to insurance. Bill, why don't you give me a little background on how CSG sees the insurance market as a whole?
Sure, Jeff. Thanks. I'm going to just take 1 minute to do a quick introduction for myself for people that may not know me. There are some people, I believe, on the call that know me, but my name is Bill Crowley. I've been with CSG now just over a year and a half through acquisition of a company called Mass Printing. Been in the insurance industry for a while, either in a carrier or in insurance technology companies, and have been focused primarily on the back-end document output solution side of it with carriers for about the last 15 years. So been in the industry for a long time and have a lot of experience in this specific area. Relative to Jeff's point about CSG, I think kind of there's two aspects around the current situation. Uh, the strategic aspect of it is really the shift to digital and the digitization of almost every aspect of the insurance business. And print mail clearly falls into that. So that strategic move to digitization is actually pulling a discussion around how do we fulfill documents to policyholders today into the discussion. And then Jeff just mentioned some of the the key drivers relative to carriers. Their costs are rising because the volumes are dropping. There's a heavy capital investment, depending on the irrelevant of the size of the carrier. And then some of the changes over the last 5 years in terms of focus are really driving carriers really the back end are really driving carriers to look at this aspect of the business a little more as they move forward.
Okay, great. So why don't we jump in? The sort of talk a little bit about market dynamics as a whole. Why don't we focus on within the carriers that you've been working with? What do you see as the specific drivers for folks considering outsourcing?
Sure. So there's a lot of drivers, but these are the biggest ones that have been at least my or our team's experience about why carriers are looking to outsource print mail today. I spoke enough, I guess, already about the digital transformation, but it's also being driven by policyholders to communicate. The policyholders are starting to tell carriers, communicate with us the way we want to be communicated to. So there's a policyholder effort behind that too. So it's not just the carriers doing it because of digital transformation, but as they engage more and more with policyholders, they have to respond to how the policyholder wants to be communicated to, and that's a big piece of it. With COVID over the last 5 years, there was a big move to look at print mail because that aspect of the operation was challenged when COVID hit and workers had to move to remote. You could not move your operation to print mail internal to a remote operation. And then regulators started to look at that. And we have many states now requiring carriers to have disaster recovery and business continuity plans in place. So that's a big driver. The in-house print and cost rising as a percentage of the business that's being delivered, if you will, is another big driver. And there have been big initiatives for carriers to move to paperless. And that can be an ominous project for how do we do this? Where do we start? So I think those are some of the big drivers relative to how do we start this project? Where do we look? How do we engage? So those are really the drivers, Jeff, the big ones that I see today.
Okay. Just a fun little anecdote. We did some work looking at business continuity plans several years ago, and one of the companies that I spoke with had in theory, a great plan for the print side of the business, but had no plan for insertion. So I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do with truckloads of paper waiting to get inserted. But I think that people now need a more comprehensive plan in that area. And I think one of the concerns that folks have, as they look at outsourcing and even business continuity, is the whole issue with manual processes. And that's a big issue as people look at it. And I think it's reflected on the limited amount of IT resources that are applied to in-house print shops today. And so you've got things that technology could solve in terms of things like manual insertion of flats, document files that come in with documents that have one sheet, and then in that same file, documents that have 100 sheets. And it's very difficult to put those on an automated insertion equipment and have it deal with that wide range of documents. And then you've got the whole issue of adding, changing, deleting pages in order to keep up with changes in regulations and trying to do that in a timely manner. And so since that's one of the big concerns that folks have when they try to outsource, what do you see in terms of solutions that CSG can offer in that space.
Sure. So let me set the context kind of on that for a minute. So when you initially engage, and this is where CSG, a company like CSG, can be really helpful to carriers when they start. One of the key starting points for us is to really engage with the carrier. And sometimes this is difficult when carriers move directly to an RFP. Our engagement process initially, even before providing any proposal, is to really sit down with the carrier and match our subject matter experts, which many come from insurance companies, have insurance backgrounds, understand the insurance industry, which is really important. And we complete some fairly complex analysis around not what CSG's business is and how do we work, but how do you as the carrier do your business today? Now, we have we're coming up on probably approaching 70 different carriers. So we've seen just about everything. I don't want to ever say we've seen everything relative to workflows, whether they be manual or automated. And we try to start out with the assumption that even with manual workflows, our focus is to try and automate everything because it's really difficult to outsource a manual process. There's a lot of history there. So again, the big aspect that we take a carrier through is really understanding, taking us to an understanding about how they do their business today and how it would work in an outsourced environment. We show them the technology. We have a cloud-based application that their inside people will move to. We show it to the carrier. We demonstrate it. We let the people that are inside the carrier see this is how it's going to work today. We know, and we've all gone through how you're doing it in your business today, and we'll match that in our portal and in our workflows. So we may work with the carrier to redesign some things, to look at things a little bit differently. But essentially what we're doing is we're redesigning workflows so that we eliminate as much manual work as we can, but also reflect what the carrier wants to produce in terms of output to the policyholder.
I think that when we did our research and went through the print site, one of the things that I was very impressed with that CSG does is work to make it so that any file that has more than one document in it is uses automatic insertion equipment. So you eliminate the human touch on document, which is where errors in terms of double stuffs and the like usually end up happening. So that's one of those things, which I guess also makes it so that if you're down to everything goes through an automated process, that also makes switching it to another location from its main one in the event of a business continuity requirements, it makes it straightforward. And as we've looked at business continuity, we've seen some customers who believe that the best approach for them, even if they've already outsourced, is to take their work and spread it against multiple providers in the hopes that if one of them goes down, the rest of them are still able to produce. We find that actually creates more problems than it solves and usually drives up costs because you're not focusing your work at one provider. And so if you can talk a little bit about how CSG approaches business continuity and sort of in the day-to-day basis, as well as in terms of a major outage of some kind.
Sure. This is a really interesting aspect. So CSG has a fully redundant, embedded disaster recovery business continuity within our solution. So every solution that we provide to a carrier, a big part of that is the disaster recovery plan and or a business continuity plan. And we have multiple sites, multiple enterprise sites where the work is fully redundant in different facilities. So that's a big aspect of that. One of the ways to enable that is when I spoke prior about the analysis and the workflow analysis we go through with the carrier. I'll get a little bit more detailed now into some of the standardization, I guess, and the materials we use. In order to, for example, in order to really provide a disaster recovery, a business continuity plan, you have to have materials staged, envelopes staged, the right paper. You have to have tested it in multiple facilities. So all of that stuff has to be in place. Let's go back again to the discussion about educating the carrier on how we do that, why we do that, letting them see both facilities, taking them out to a tour of the facility. We generally do that. Some carriers want to see both facilities. So it's an important aspect of your assessment. Once again, I keep coming back to the assessment and the education of both CSG as a partner, not a vendor, but a partner, and the carrier to make sure that we do all the upfront work in our pre-proposal phase. So getting those materials in place, understanding those workflows, moving from a flat manual insertion process to an automated insertion process, having a carrier see what and the people that are running the operation, what a flat automated insertion process looks like. It's actually pretty amazing seeing that work on inline. Some carriers, the bigger carriers, have those operationally today. A lot of carriers don't. So those are some of the big aspects of ensuring that you have a partner, a single partner that can provide all of this and not have to break it up for a reason that you think in order to protect yourself or reduce risk or make sure that the provider, that you have an additional BCP or DR on your own.
So let's talk about savings. I think, as I mentioned before, we sort of hit the low point in terms of doing work. And as much as I hate this term, if people look at, the whole concept of lift and shift, where I'm going to take my work the way it's done today and I'm going to move it to an outsourcing provider and they're going to do it exactly the same way. So there's no major savings in doing that. You still have your postage costs, you got your material costs, you save a little bit on labor, you might save a little bit on real estate, but in general, your costs are going to be pretty similar if you're doing the same thing exactly the same way. So where do you see opportunities for real savings when I move to someone like CSG? What's the real place for a win?
Sure. So I think you mentioned labor and capital equipment and those are some of the biggest costs. In the analysis phase that we do, we're looking at optimizing the carrier's current workflows and really assessing how they do business today. Can we move documents? We've had many carriers that are using, let's say, only a number 10 envelope, standard letter envelope, and a flat document in their workflows, and they don't utilize a 6x9. Well, a 6x9, moving document output from a 9x12 to a 6x9 envelope can significantly reduce your costs, primarily both through materials, but primarily through postage. It can be a significant decrease. So, and it's interesting, when I first started out in this 15 years ago, just as a mix of postage costs to processing cost, it was running about 50-50. So and it wasn't carrier size driven. Most of the carriers had roughly, 50% of the cost was postage and 50% was processing in their internal operation. Or when we assessed it in ours, the postage has increased over the last 4 years or 5 to 10 years so much, and it's not stopping. We're now seeing USPS postage increases twice a year, where we would see them every 2 years, 10 years ago. So, that assessment there, that what we call a smart envelope strategy, things like that. And then post-implementation, one of the things we do is we provide analytics back to the carrier. So we have an account management team. So once we go live, we migrate to an account management team, which is involved up front. Many of our people are involved. The account management team will be involved even at implementation. They start to be involved. So we transition that relationship management from a let's get live relationship to let's run the operation relationship, and those resources change and that relationship changes. So it's operations to operations. The focus of that is not just to problem solve or we have a problem. We start looking at the business and helping you look at alternative ways. We'll start to see things in our operation that you may want to think about changing. As you said, sometimes the upstream business inside of a carrier will make changes to their documents, and downstream people, in the output group, people won't be aware of that. Legal may have added a form into a new business policy that's 10 new pages, and all of a sudden, print and postage costs, you move from a 6x9 envelope to a 9x12 envelope. Nobody in the carrier really realizes it. We will see that right away because of analytics. So there's things like that we do ongoing with the carrier, with regular meetings, with regular looking at things that really provide value post-implementation. So, understanding, again, the insurance business and how the intricacies of it is a big driver of that.
I think one of the things that we were very impressed with when we did the tour of the facility is the fact that you've actually got staff who walk around the operations floor, work with the operators to improve processes on a daily basis, and also just go through and make sure that the operators are following the written procedures, so that the quality and the ability to track a document and make sure that there are no errors in it as it goes out the door. I mean, that's all a part of the analytics and the like that you're talking about there. So that sort of comes back to the whole concept that internal operations lack the IT support to build new processes, build new tools, be able to implement new features, and make changes in the workflow. I mean, you talked about going to a 6x9. Obviously, you've got an inserter process there in terms of how many sheets each one can take, whether it's number 10, 6x9, flats, etc. But you need, in order to implement a change like that, you also need IT resources to slice up the files into the right page counts for each one of those envelopes. So can you talk about what sort of the process that you use, as well as the resources that CSG has to enable some of that capabilities that aren't easily achieved internally?
Sure. So let me step back for a minute. And you mentioned something early on. It's about the process on the floor, on the floor that happens. It's always eye-opening when we take a prospective client or an existing client through the CSG facility and have the people that run their operation every day explain to them how that works. They see the quality of the process. They see the quality of the people. They see the capital equipment that's being worked. They see the insert process. And that is probably the biggest piece of understanding where the carrier now connects. We show them as much as possible, usually it's very possible, an insurance workflow in process, so that they can see exactly what's happening. So that is a very powerful, and again, all those quality processes that are extremely tight inside of a company like CSG are really visible to the prospective carrier right there. I think if there's one message carriers hear today, we are very aware of how important this workflow is, and that we as an organization, CSG, become a full extension of your operational team, whether it's the project management or business analysis or floor operations, or development, right through to those resources. We become an extension of your team. I'll just give one example that pops to head. We had one of our existing clients recently. They were doing a claims. They were trying to restructure how they do claims output. If there's carriers on board, they know how complex that workflow can be. They engaged a software partner to help them do that. Through that process, we got engaged because the output is going to come through us. So we engaged with their partner, with the carrier's partner, and developed a full end-to-end solution on behalf of the carrier to make sure that this workflow works from start to finish, is tested, is technology enabled, and really provides significantly more value to the carrier than just, okay, we have a vendor over here and we have a vendor over here and we have to manage it. No, we stepped in, we worked as a team. So that's just one example of what can happen post implementation because we are such an integral part of this workflow.
Great. So just to wrap up, somebody's listened to this and we've, set a light bulb off on their head. So what's the next process? What does somebody do if they want to, figure out how they can improve their processes and save some money in the process?
So the first bullet up there, start now. Call me. I'll call us. I think I call it an education process, not a selling process. I think I've harped on this enough through the call that before we get to proposal, it's an understanding phase. It's understanding what the carrier is doing today, and how we would match that up, how other carriers are doing this type of business today. So that education process is really eye-opening on both sides. And there's no, I don't want to say there's no cost, but there's limited cost to really assessing what does this look like, and how can we get started? Because it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for you to feel comfortable. Again, there's going to be challenges as we go through this, and there's going to be assessments and analysis that needs to be done. So coming to a common place with how could we do this and how we could work together from a partnering standpoint. I think another big piece of this is the partner versus a vendor. If you look at it as a vendor relationship, you may not get the partnering the key aspects of the partnering that we take very seriously as being an extension of your organization. The insurance SME knowledge. We go way back for about 15 years now, and we're all insurance people first and print people second. Well, not all of us, but a lot of us are. So I think that's another, big aspect in differentiation, and how, again, how do you validate that? But I think the engagement process, again, pre-proposal stage is a big piece of that. So anyway, I don't know. I think that's kind of a brief overview of some of the key takeaways here. I think it's kind of embedded in the discussion too.
Yep. You make an interesting observation in terms of the vendor versus partner model. And we've seen it in the RFPs that we've run for people as they look for an external provider such as CSG. And one of our customers came back, I don't know, a year or two in, and basically said, we looked at this originally as a, 5-year deal. We've seen people look at it as a 3-year with, 2 1-year extensions to the initial contract. And he said, it really doesn't matter. You can't look at it with a 5-year horizon and say, if we don't like it, we're going to make a change. You're really, if you decide on a vendor, you're really kicking in for 10 years. 15 years. You're making a lifetime partner here. And so when you work together, you have to figure out how are we going to make these things happen. And so that's why the due diligence up front of, what do these people offer in terms of the physical plant for producing the equipment, but also who am I talking to? And do the people I'm talking to understand the insurance marketplace? Are they using the same words? Do they understand the pressures in different areas, billing, claims processing, et cetera? And to me, that kind of weighs heavily in terms of the capabilities and also who is it we want to deal with for the next 10 years, right? Yep. And that's really, once you implement a bunch of stuff like, automating the manual processes, doing all the things you need in order to reduce the postage costs and the like, you can't just pull that out and go somewhere else. So having that attitude going in is, in my opinion, the wrong attitude for a carrier. It's we're making a commitment here to a partner.
Right. We've gone through a couple of RFPs That's an interesting process where, you know, an RFP process, you can either just answer the questions that are being asked. Sometimes it's a risk to actually say, have you thought about this? And we will do that. We will go back and say, again, sometimes the carriers may not be asking the right questions, and we will actually push back and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So we even try to make the RFP process, wherever possible, engaging, if you will, just because it's in our own best interest to, in the carrier's interest, to make sure that we're discussing some of the key elements that really differentiate CSJ. I think I think we have a great insurance team. Moving from mass printing, where we had probably extended maybe 20, 25 people and different partners, we now have a whole organization behind us, an enterprise level organization that's really taken off in the last year. And it's, we're building our insurance expertise well beyond even where it was, which I thought was very good over the last year and a half. So, pushing that into the RFP process and pushing back can be maybe risky, but also helpful from a carrier standpoint if they appreciate that.
Right. Okay, so I know that we're pretty close to the end here.
Yep.
And so we've had our chat open to see if we've got any questions from folks. Rebecca, have you?
I have. Thank you both for a great conversation. I hope this was a really informative session for everyone. We've had some questions come in. I'm going to start with the ones that we hear the most often from our customers, and then we'll go back to some of the live audience Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please do post them up now, and we'll go through them. So my first question is to both of you. Where do you see digital adoption taking hold in the P&C industry as it stands today?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So specific to the, let's call it policyholder document output, I think it varies by channel. And what I call channel is the direct carriers versus the agent carriers, or their businesses, if you will, a carrier's direct business versus their agent business. The direct business has a higher adoption rate because the carrier will have the relationship with the policyholder direct, and they'll be able to get that information. And, like an example of a company like Lemonade that goes out to market right away, 100% direct. They're direct to the policyholder and getting the proper information about the policyholder in terms of communicating to them and the opting into that digital communication right up front. In the independent agent channel and with carriers that have agent workflows, it's just not that simple. There's legacy workflows out there. It's not as easy. And the carrier has the responsibility to make sure that they have the policyholder opt in. So to answer the question directly, my experience has been that the direct carriers have about a 50% paperless adoption rate, some higher, like a Lemonade that went right out of the gate. In the independent agent channel, I think the best that I've seen is maybe a 20 to 30% paperless adoption. It's moving. It's not moving as quickly as I think people would want it to, but it is moving. But that's where I see the adoption rate today.
And I think we see some similar things, and I'll talk about it as much from the carrier side. So two stories. One, we were working with one carrier who has independent agents, and they started to take advantage of a clause in their contracts with them to because they are the direct interface with the ultimate client. They pushed off production of policies to the independent agent. So they took a bunch of print work out of their own print facility and sent it off to the agents because then they could decide, do I need to deliver this as a paper document or not? And so whereas the standard procedure inside the company was always print the document and mail it, the independent agent had a little more flexibility on that. And then was the other piece? Well, the other piece is sort of against uh, digitization in a way, which is the way that people pay for things comes in. And some people like to receive an invoice in the mail because that then becomes a trigger for them to pay the bill, even if they pay the bill electronically. And so, in that aspect, you're always going to have to mail something to those people. And that is the surprising across age groups. It is not specific to, um, you know, older folks. It's younger people as well. There are some technical things that can be done there. Like if I know that you always pay electronically, I'm not going to send a business reply envelope because you're never going to send it back in. So I've got some cost savings there. But it's those kind of capabilities, again, that the internal IT department, it's not on their priority list. Using an outside provider gives you access to those capabilities.
Great answer. My second question is one of the takeaways that you mentioned was start now, it's an education process. So what would you say is the key first step?
Be open to the analysis of your internal operation and engage, and come in kind of open-minded with, with what works now and how could it work in a different environment, and also the technology that supports it. So I think again, it's not a cost element to do the assessment other than your internal resources and gaining an understanding. So I think that analysis of your internal operations and getting some information on what exactly is out there, and it's not just who the players are, but how do they work, would be my first step.
And I would say towards that end, in order to make the most of those conversations, is having a really solid handle on what your current costs are. And with internal accounting, there's a lot of tending towards big buckets, but understanding what your paper costs are, your envelope costs, your labor costs, what's the equipment costing you, not only in terms of, are you paying a lease, but also, what's the maintenance costs on particular things. As equipment gets older, it becomes increasingly expensive to maintain them, including trying to find parts and the like for some of the older stuff that's out there. So in terms of aiding an assessment, understanding what your current costs are is a key component to
Yep.
that.
And you both alluded to the fact that having a provider that has insurance SME knowledge is critical. But how do you validate that a provider has that SME knowledge and not just print knowledge?
Yeah, I think when you go through this process, that's a big part of it, not just the information and the costs, but when you engage with the team, I think if there are insurance operations people involved and not just, let's say, a lead person that's not within the operation, engage your operational people in the discussion. They'll know whether the people on the other side of the table, for example, we bring people in for different discussions, right down to the operational floor if we need to, in order to do the education process. So, and you'll see, during that process, you'll be able to validate whether or not the people understand the insurance, just in the way people talk. Do they understand the difference between, the workflows, the language, the renewal documents, a cancellation document, and why a cancellation document is so important. Why, if you misstep and don't send out a billing file and it gets, I've heard many stories of files being lost and a billing, or an invoice file that doesn't get processed for 10 days, what the downstream effect of that is within a carrier. And I'm not going to get into that on the phone, but I think if this carrier's on the phone, they understand what can happen when that happens. So it's just things like that. If you talk about it, or that would be my suggestion. Ask some questions. It's okay.
I would say that's exactly key. If the people on the other side of the table have deer in the headlights look or a glazed look when you start using some of some insurance specific terms, if you will, then they might not be the right team.
I think that's great advice. In the interest of time, I do believe we have an opportunity to answer one more question that's come in from our live audience. During your analysis of the business, do you make suggestions about spacing on forms, or is it just on envelopes?
Yes, we do. So during the analysis phase, we will ask for copies of just about every output type. New business policies, whether it's commercial or new personal lines, renewal decks, billing statements. And one of our analyses are, what does this look like? How will it print? Where do we put barcodes on? What we may have from a challenge standpoint, what we may have to move. So absolutely, we are looking at the physical output, not just the digital output. And then through our testing process and implementation, we'll validate all of that. So we absolutely look at all of that and can make suggestions as we go through that process.
I have nothing to add on that.
I do have one more question.
Sure.
And I think we have about 3 minutes left before we get to the quarter before the hour. So some carriers feel comfortable having their print operations in-house, where they can still, metaphorically touch and feel the operation as it's happening. What's the feedback been from carriers who you encountered who were very hesitant in the beginning, but then did move to CSG?
I'll give a quick, anecdotal. The pandemic was a key, I don't know, key part of basically saying that is no longer real. There used to be the whole comfort of I can go downstairs and talk to somebody in the print facility, and that when people went home to work, you couldn't do that. You were physically barred from entering the print facility, and subsequent to that, people have figured out that they don't really ever do it, right? Nobody actually takes advantage. It's more of a mental thing than anything else. And so I would say that a lot of that I'll go downstairs and touch it has been altered by work from home rules, just changes in real estate about where the different facilities are and people moving offices, and suddenly, you've pushed people away from where the print facility is. So we have seen that is less of an issue with outsourcing than it has been in the past. I don't know about you, Bill.
Yeah, what I would say is, and I'd offer this up right out of the gate, talk to our existing clients. We open up our client list once we sign an NDA. We'll open up contacts to people. Don't talk to us, talk to our carriers, talk to our customers today, how they did it. We've had that anecdotal feedback, and Jeff is right. Once people see that you're moving from, okay, it prints out on the floor and now we can physically see it, you're getting the same capability. It's just a transition or a migration. On our application, you will see every single one of those documents. They'll be organized in a file structure that you get comfortable with through the process. So you may not be touching the paper physically, but you're digitally seeing every document as you go. You're getting the ability to approve files down to the document level. You can eliminate files. So the best way for me to answer that is talk to some of our clients that have done it, that have had some of those thoughts, and then actually see a demo of our application. And you'll connect pretty quickly to what we're talking about here relative to getting comfortable with that transition.
I would say that's a key piece, that the access that you have to documents and status and the like is vastly improved when you use someone like CSG than what the internal facilities are able to provide, just because infrastructure like that is able to be spread across all of CSG's customers, and then any individual customer gets to leverage the capabilities that are there, and the whole ability to approve documents, to view documents, to go back and look at documents that were sent in the past. It's all capabilities that you probably don't have in-house today.
Thank you. That's the last of our questions, and I know we're approaching the end of the session. We do have a QR code on screen now for you to download our latest industry white paper, and every attendee will receive a link to the on-demand version of this webinar with a link again to contact Bill or Jeff, and also to download the white paper. I want to take this opportunity to extend our thanks to Bill and Jeff for joining us today, and to thank you all for attending. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you.